Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video I am going to run the risk of being covered in drool and bile as the die-hard Brexiteers are no doubt already foaming at the mouth, having seen the clickbait title. But before they start spitting and hissing, inevitably, this is not a rerun of the debate of whether Brexit is or isn't a good idea. Well, there is no debate. Brexit was a terrible and remains a terrible idea, and that has become increasingly clear to pretty much anybody who is not too far down the rabbit hole really to see daylight. So for the rest of us normal human beings that wish to examine the issue, I think it's worth looking at what the future holds for Brexit. Now, at the risk of course being covered in spit and bile, I've got my wet wipes handy, and for those of a sensitive disposition, I did do first aid training, but I'm a bit rusty, so you might not want to have a heart attack anywhere near me if your life wants to depend upon it. But I'm going to look at what I consider to be the future of Brexit. These opinions are very much my own, and they're based upon what I have seen reported in terms of evidence, in terms of polling, in terms of opinions, and so on, and trying to make a future forecast. Now, of course, making any kind of forecast in a political sense is always risky, and no doubt at some point in the future someone will drag up this video, beat me over the head with it and say, aha, you got that wrong. We shall see. But for now, a little bit of a thought experiment. Let's look at this point in time in February 2023, what is like the likely future for Brexit and why. So let's get the obvious out of the way first. Brexit is failing, massively failing, and there's not really any argument about this. This can be seen everywhere. Now, I know the die-hard Brexiteers are desperately trying to pretend this is not the truth. They're trying to cling to a whole host of spurious arguments, or even if they do admit it's true, then they kind of come up with a rather ludicrous plot that the Remainers attempting to having frustrated it and having destroyed the country in the process of frustrating Brexit. But no, let's ignore all of that. Let's keep this nice and simple and a nice big sweeping generalization. On every measure that anybody cares to measure, Brexit has failed. Economically, socially, politically. I mean, the economy has pretty much suffered, and the evidence is increasingly clear that Brexit is causing a significant level of suffering on top of all the other problems. Now, people can make a very valid argument that these are the consequences of poor policy decisions by the government more than Brexit, and there is a fair argument to be made there. However, the incompetence of the government is very much intrinsically linked to Brexit. This is because the current government has hung their whole political credibility on delivering Brexit. So everything else that they have failed at is by very much association going to be linked to Brexit. So as a consequence of that, Brexit is tainted by association, and I've used that phrase before. So what this means, and opinion polls are very much showing this, in the eyes of many of the British electorate, and that number is increasing month by month, Brexit has failed. Brexit is discredited. It is a failed project, in the same way that Liz Truss's little fun mini budget was a failed experiment and a failed project. So what this means that when it comes to economics, or the economy of the UK, there is no going back for Brexit. That is it. It cannot be sustained. That is inevitable now, and that is even being admitted to at the senior levels of the Conservative Party. But there's some other elements of failure as well. We can talk about democracy, because one of the big shining promises of Brexit, one of the many lies that were told during the campaign, was that getting away from the EU would allow British democracy to flourish, to become stronger. As everybody can see now, the exact opposite is true. British democracy is now heading into a very dark place where, if it's not careful, it will become about as valid example of democracy as Putin's Russia. So that is going to be reversed the minute any different political party gets in. Because again, that cannot be sustained. And of course, there's a whole debate to be had on what that looks like, what sort of changes or reforms need to happen to British democracy. But again, maintaining the status quo is not going to be sustainable. And believing that you can deliver Brexit without, in some ways, being seen to fix British democracy is just not going to happen. The electorate is now not really in the mood for it. And to be honest, as I've spoken before on this channel, even those who voted for Brexit in many ways were voting for democratic change. They were voting for political reform because they wanted more political accountability, that the politicians making decisions that affected their lives could be held directly accountable. So yeah, well done, Conservative Party. You've done a really good job of proving how broken British democracy is and how badly in need of reform it is in order to deliver increased accountability of politicians through the electorate. So maybe on that measure you can say Brexit has succeeded, just not necessarily in the way that the Brexiteers intended. Now I'm going to just deviate slightly from this topic of failure and saying there are some small things that Brexit could have done that may have been deemed to have been a success should those leveraging Brexit have desired to do so. So I'll use a particular example. Let's take the current energy crisis and cost of living crisis. Because the UK is no longer part of the EU, that meant there's a certain level of relaxation on things like the state aid rules. So that means that the UK government could, if it had wanted to, have done quite significant state interventions in things like energy markets or transport markets or even food if they really wanted to. They could have put in a whole host of measures to reduce inflation, to have prevented energy prices going up. And now normally that would have been a breach of state aid rules, for example, or level playing field rules that the EU might also call them. So the British government could have done that. But rather unfortunately, perhaps for everyone really, the Conservative Party are very much attached to certain ideologies. Those ideologies are very much against using state aid, even if you actually have the freedom to do so. Very much they sought to do the exact opposite of that. So in that context, they have failed, and it can be argued the failure is political due to the people in charge more than Brexit specifically. But I go back to my earlier point, and that is guilt by association. They were the people. The Liz Trusses and her merry little band very much drove Brexit. They drove its design, and even though they made decisions more in line with their ideology rather than what Brexit actually was, the two are now seen as linked. So I suppose perhaps another congratulation to the Conservative Party is that they've managed to totally discredit some of their core ideology as well by having it so closely linked to Brexit. So really, in summary, there is literally nothing anyone can look towards to say that Brexit has improved in any meaningful way. And of course, various politicians will try and talk about Brexit opportunities and freedoms, but you only need to really scratch beyond the surface to realise that there's nothing there. There's no actual reality, there's no evidence, there's no data. But what there are very obvious failures. And I think there's no hiding that anymore. And those still promoting it, those still shrilling desperately, they're getting louder. And you can hear, you can see the desperation. and those still trying to support and promote Brexit, on the news, on the radio, on the television, because they know these failures are becoming increasingly obvious and they're becoming desperate to try and reverse them. And can they do so? That is the question. So the next stage for British politics, and it doesn't matter which political party is in charge, is going to be this phrase, make Brexit work. Now this could be a very interesting conversation. It can be argued that this is impossible. And the reason why it is impossible, because the whole underpinning argument to Brexit, not what people voted for, but what the argument made by those in politics, those in charge, was a lie. The basis of everything they said was a complete lie. And so what that means is you cannot deliver on a lie. And if you cannot deliver on a lie, then actually you cannot make Brexit work. That is just simply not possible. But they're going to try anyway. And that is the nature of British politics. It is too big a jump from, Brexit has been done to we must completely reverse it sort of argument. So some people may see this at the intermediate step, that they will try to make Brexit work. What does that mean in reality, or in practice, I should say? Well, I think one phrase I've heard used is that the Labour Party under Keir Starmer are now going to pursue a policy that could otherwise be called as dynamic alignment. So that doesn't mean rejoin the EU, that doesn't mean rejoin the single market and all the other bits and pieces. But it does mean that British regulation, British policies and so on will try to mirror those of the EU to the closest extent possible. And so for those puzzling why the Conservative Party is so hell-bent on the sort of EU laws and revocation bill, despite the hugely obvious levels of chaos and damage it will cause, it is because they fear this policy of dynamic alignment. They know that is the next stage, and they're doing everything possible to pursue a scorched earth policy to prevent it. But there are valid questions about whether that's going to be possible, despite their best efforts. So either way, regardless of who is in charge, or when the next general election may be, dynamic alignment is going to have to be the next policy. That is going to be making Brexit work, and that is going to be the interim solution, the quick fix. That's going to, and it will have an immediate effect. And here's one of the funny little secrets that I'll let you into when it comes to the international negotiation. To do dynamic alignment, you do not actually need the EU's consent. Any nation can unilaterally decide to copy all of the EU's regulation and thus achieve dynamic alignment. And in fact, the EU has pretty much no objection to this. They're very happy when other nations do that. That is why they're a regulatory superpower. They set the regulation that everyone copies. Why? Because generally they're seen as good regulations. They're sensible, and if everyone has a common benchmark or common set of standards that they operate to, it makes working together and trading and all sorts of other things so much easier. So this is the instant win, the quick fix that someone like Keir Starmer can implement in order to mitigate some of the damage that Brexit is causing to the UK, politically and economically. And while that will be an immediate impact from pursuing such policies, the reality is that it will only have a limited shelf life. What is that shelf life? I don't know. But I do know that it will not be sustainable in the long term. There will have to be some kind of other policy to go beyond making Brexit work. And I'm going to talk about that next. So let's talk about demographics, specifically voting demographics. Because this is well known in the context of the Brexit debate that it was the older generation who overwhelmingly voted in favour of Brexit, and the younger generation that fairly overwhelmingly when they did bother to vote, voted against Brexit. And so there has been a very significant shift in recent months. So what that kind of means, looking at the polls and opinion data that's been gathered so far, is that predominantly the age groups under 50 very much overwhelmingly do not like Brexit, and probably overwhelmingly would be in favour of seeing it reversed. Now those over 60, the numbers have reduced, but you've got some pretty dedicated diehards, and dying perhaps is a poor choice of words, although relevant, who still stick with Brexit. They do not want to change their mind. They still believe, no matter what, Brexit should be pursued. So when they die of old age or prematurely, courtesy of Brexit and the disaster that's currently the NHS system, or social care, they will no longer be a voting bloc. Not to spuriously quote the likes of Lee Anderson, but there is a 100% non-voting rate for anyone who's dead. So the older demographic, who are the core vote for Brexit, are going to reduce in number, whether that's their opinions shifting to a small degree, or whether that's just them no longer voting for other reasons, like being ill in hospital or just plain dead. That then means that those in the younger demographics will form a higher proportion of the vote. So what that means is that over time there will be more of a shift in favour of being part of the EU. Does that mean they will jump all the way through joining single market, customs union, all the way to full EU membership? Possibly not. Possibly there'll be certain stages. But it is rather inevitable that the younger generation are going to look at the inexorable failures brought upon by Brexit and decide that is not something they want to support, that is something they want to vote against. So again, congratulations to the Conservative Party. They probably will be much more successful than the Labour Party in being able to get the young out to vote. Of course, that is because the young will now vote because they hate Brexit. They probably hate the Conservative Party too, for many reasons, not just Brexit. And because Brexit has brought home to so many people what not voting looks like, what damage can be done when you let people discharge power in unaccountable ways, that I think is going to create a newer generation who are going to be more determined to be politically involved in order to prevent that sort of thing happening to them again. So ironically enough, despite the attempts of the Conservative Party at a bit of voter suppression and to make it easier for the older demographics to vote and harder for the younger demographics to vote, I'm going to make a dangerous prediction here that in future, and especially the next general election, we're going to see a higher proportion of younger people voting because they will be very interested, very much self-interested, to overturn the direction of travel when it comes to Brexit and to have certainly more alignment with the EU, if not full membership of the EU. And as time goes on, unless somebody is genuinely able to make Brexit work, this demographic and even the younger demographic not yet able to vote will cast their vote, and they will do so in a way that they believe to be in their interest. And I talk a lot on this channel about this important concept of alignment, being aligned with other people. We have a very clear example of non-alignment. The younger demographics do not align with the morality, the cultural perspectives of the older generation. And so when it is their turn to be influential, they will exercise their voting rights and they will change those decisions that were made by their grandparents or their parents, which they do not agree with. So let's also touch upon a little bit of geopolitics, which I've covered before on this channel, so I won't go over some of the old ground. But I've asked a little bit of a question. What do you do when you're a country all on your own, things are not going well for you, and you need to try and find a way to influence global events, strengthen your power, strengthen your economic power? Oh, I know what. Why not invade your next door neighbour? So, how's that looking for you, Mr. Putin? Doesn't look so good, does it? Now, of course, I don't think the UK is in any danger of invading France, or Denmark, or Belgium. Well, who knows, maybe Iceland. I mean, but why would anyone want to invade Iceland? I don't think that's too much of a high risk in the UK. But I think what the UK is going to very rapidly learn, as Russia and China are currently learning, is that being on your own in this current world order is an extremely dangerous place to be. It's a very isolating place. It's a very harmful place. Because powerful as they are, countries like Russia and China are, economically or militarily, or no longer in the case of Russia, on either front. Let's look more towards China there. But powerful as they are, their ability to influence world events in their favour is extremely limited if you don't have lots of friends. Now, massively powerful as the US is, the US strength is not because it is the biggest economy, which it is, or it's the biggest military, which it also is, but because it has those partnerships with a whole range of other countries or international bodies. It is able to influence them to make decisions that it agrees with, whether that be the EU, the UN, or any other country or body. And of course there are many that don't agree and don't align with the US, but they're not the most influential countries around as a rule. And even those who do have a certain level of influence, for example Saudi Arabia, is still going to be wary of challenging the likes of the US that bit too much. So what that means is, hilariously enough, that at a time when the whole world is forming power blocks, and right now the US is distancing itself a bit from China economically, and looking towards countries like Canada and Mexico. And Mexico has been talked about a lot in economic circles recently. That is going to be the new power dynamic, the new economic trading bloc, where even more trade is going to be crossing the US-Mexico border. So consider that like a trading bloc. The EU, of course, is its own trading community and bloc. Latin America is now looking to form its own power and trading bloc. And this can be most seen in the current noises being made between Brazil and Argentina to create some kind of common or tradable currencies. That kind of proposal is being looked upon very favourably by many other countries in Latin America, because they are recognising they need to form a bloc. Countries like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Australia, they are all trying to form their own Asia-Pacific sort of bloc as well, whether that's to do with trade, economics or military. The UK stands alone in completely bucking this trend. And to give one very clear example on where that is going to really cost the UK is on the whole conversation about green energy. Because the US is going to pour billions of dollars into inventing green energy. Now, this is not just about climate change, although of course that is one key driver. It's also about having technologies, having the technical edge, and creating new markets, creating an industrial base for those technologies. Those are the future growth areas. And the EU itself has recognised this threat from the US and quickly rolled out or beefed up its own policies on green energies. Even countries like Saudi Arabia have quite strong green energy policies because they recognise that as being the future. Yeah, oil may be the money spinner for countries like Saudi Arabia, but they know that the future is in having those technologies, having access and having the ability to manufacture those technologies. So you look at all those shifting allegiances and power plays and ask, where did the UK fit in that? It's just a small island off the Atlantic, off the coast of Europe in the Atlantic, sitting between two big power blocks and not solidly a member of either, with the exception of NATO. But that's not enough. And so when it comes to the geopolitical reality, Brexit simply has to be reversed if the UK wants in on those technologies, on that future growth. The UK has to make a choice. What power block is it going to join? Right now, the Conservative Party policy is complete and utter economic nonsense that it will join the Asia-Pacific power block. When in reality, the realistic choices for the UK is either Europe or the US. I think we can rule out Latin America, to be honest. UK could try that, but I don't think they're going to get very far. So yeah, the UK's choices in a geopolitical sense is to align very significantly with the US or to align very significantly with Europe. And the UK could try and revitalise the Commonwealth and the Caribbean or the African states, or try and rebuild the relationship with growing economies like India. But they have their own concerns and their own interests, and they're not really interested in the UK. So what that means is the UK is going to fall increasingly behind until it's able to access or be a member of a club. And right now, the most powerful clubs in the world are American or European. The Russians don't have one. The Chinese don't really have one, or they're starting to realise that they need one. And so the UK will be very much isolated and left alone in this context. And that is no way to recover the situation if that is maintained. So well done if you've made it this far and not covered your screen and spit and drool in anger. As I said at the beginning of this video, this is not an argument about Brexit was a bad idea. We know Brexit was a bad idea. This is arguing what is going to happen next. And the reality is Brexit has failed. Brexit is a very visible failure. And even if there was a credible plan to recover that, I don't think anyone is going to give that plan much time. The mood music over time is very much going to be to reverse Brexit. Now, this is not going to be an instant Big Bang thing. Brexit will be reversed in stages. So there'll be dynamic alignment. There might even be rejoining the single market, but without joining the EU. Then later on might be the customs union. And then later on still, we might be talking 10 or 15 years, as the younger generation become more influential at a voting bloc. And if no one had clearly made the case of how the UK has been better off outside of it, then I would predict, and it's a dangerous prediction, so if I'm wrong in 10 or 15 years time, do come back and tell me about it. But I think that that generation will make the UK go back into the EU. And those still shrilling for Brexit know this. And they're doing everything they can to discourage it, everything they can to frustrate it. But nothing really permanent in a democratic system. People always have the right to change their mind. In fact, that is the whole point of democracy. The whole point is to allow people to campaign for things that they think, that they disagree with the status quo, and for it to be changed. And right now, the opinion polls are showing a very significant shift towards not allowing Brexit to continue in its current form. And when you look at the demographic data and the opinion polls associated with that, that shift is even stronger. So perhaps I am more confident than I've ever been before in saying that Brexit is probably going to be reversed. Will it take many years? No doubt it will. But I think the direction of travel is now obvious. And those shrilling for Brexit can fight it as much as possible. But the truth is, they cannot shout it down. You cannot shout down failure. You can only prove people wrong by turning failure into success. And the reality is, I think, that those who have significantly nailed their colours to the Brexit mast don't have the competence, don't have the vision or the ability to make Brexit a success. They never did. As a consequence of that, they can't take what is an even more difficult challenge now and turn it around. That is simply not going to be possible. Now, despite that, and I'm sure those who strongly support Rejoin are cheered by this thought, the sad truth is the damage has been done. The UK economy will not recover from this disaster for a very, very long time, no matter how good the leadership, no matter how good the policy that are implemented by whoever in the short to medium term. There will still be things that cannot be reversed for a very long time. And the UK, economically, politically, perhaps even socially, it's never going to be the same again. Brexit has fundamentally changed things. And even if Brexit is undone, those changes, well, even though changes are undone, it won't be back to how things were before. So to a certain degree, certain changes are just inevitable. And I think what that also means is a deep political divide, the scars of Brexit. And again, not a particularly cheerful thought, but the scars of Brexit will continue. Those who supported it will start to be vilified by those who managed to undo it for the damage, the harm that they caused the UK. And as much as anyone might want to have the opinion that those people deserve to be mocked, to be ridiculed, to be despised, that is not going to be healthy in a political or social sense. So again, the damage of Brexit is more than skin deep, and it's going to significantly harm British political conversation for a long, long time to come. But hey, look on the positive. At least Brexit is going to be undone, and those who have their own less than exemplary reasons for supporting Brexit will receive their just desserts. And there's a nice cheerful thought to end this video. So I hope you found this interesting. Again, all views here are my own. This is based on my reading. I've not particularly evidenced this. I haven't wasted the time in doing that. This is very much an opinion piece. But I hope people have found this interesting, helpful, insightful, shape your views, shape some of your perspectives. And please do like, subscribe, and comment below.